In this video, I will be covering how to make the 6 different colors you see here, as well as piping consistency and flood consistency. So let's get started. First, we're going to start with white. This is the icing fresh out of the mixer. It's very thick. We don't need to add any extra color to white. We are going to just do our outline consistency, so it's going to be thicker than our flood consistency. I use a spray bottle. You can also use just a teaspoon of water at a time, and I'm going to loosen it up and make it slightly thinner so it's a little bit easier to work with. Again, we're not going to be adding a ton of extra moisture to this icing. We do need it thicker because it's going to act like a wall for our other icing. It will keep the flood icing from falling off the cookie. This is about 3 ounces of icing, which is all you need per color to complete the cookie set in your kit. And you can see that it's very thick, but it's still going to be easy to work with because it does have a looser texture. Next, we're going to cut our piping bag. You're only cutting the very tip of the bag off. I like to call it a pencil tip. It's hard to tell in this video, but it's a very tiny little tip. As you can see, you can always cut it wider if you need to, but you can't go back, so don't cut it too wide. Next, you're going to take a pint glass or a plastic cup if you've got it, and put your piping bag into it and tuck it around the edges, and this will make sure we can get our icing all the way into the bottom of the bag. And then go ahead and start scooping about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of that thick icing. We don't want to use all of the 3 ounces of icing because we're going to use the rest of it for flood icing, and we'll need a lot more flood icing than we will for our piping outline icing. Once we get it in our bag, we're going to go ahead and just push that icing down to the tip. And this is why I always cut the tip first, because we need a little bit of air in there so that we can squeeze our icing all the way down to the bottom. And then you can use a rubber band. If you don't like tying them, I simply tie off my bags like this. And there you have it. You have your first outline consistency bag of icing. Next, we're going to make our flood icing. So we're going to take the same bowl of 3 ounces of white icing and add water. It's very difficult to say exactly how much water you should add because it's a lot about how you start to feel. You get a feel for the consistency of icing. So I just start with little sprays. Again, if you don't have a spray bottle, just add a teaspoon at a time and then mix. So you'll start to see it's starting to thin out quite a bit. And we're going to look for about a 10 to 15 second consistency, which means when we put our spatula through the icing, it takes about 10 to 15 seconds for it to lie completely flat again. So you saw I made that figure 8, and I was just counting to see how long it was going to take for that figure 8 to go flat in my icing. So we're pretty much at a good 10-second consistency right now, which is a great consistency that I like to work with. And then we just do the same thing. This time we don't need to cut our bag ahead of time because this is just our flood icing. And if we cut our bag, it might pour out before we want it to. And it'll be a lot easier to get to the tip because it's not as thick as your outline icing. Then we're going to scoop it into the piping bag. Again, this is a lot thinner of icing than our thicker outline consistency icing. And make sure you get every little last drop. We're actually going to mix all our colors into the same bowl, so it's really important that you scrape that bowl really good to get all of the excess icing into your piping bag. Then once we have it, we're going to do the same thing, pull it out of the cup, push that icing down to the very top, and then tie off your bag. The one extra little trick that we're going to do with our flood icing is we're going to helicopter it, as you see here, in the air. And I do this for about a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds at most. And what that does is it pops all of the air bubbles in our icing bag so we don't have air bubbles coming out on our cookies. You might still have a few, but it won't be nearly as bad if you don't do the helicopter method. And there you have it. You now have your outline and flood icing. Okay, now we're going to move on to our yellow icing. Again, we're working with about 3 ounces of icing. This is the icing straight from the mixing bowl. We're just going to do about a drop to 2 drops of yellow dye into our thick outline icing, and go ahead and add just a squirt of water, or half a teaspoon of water, just to loosen it up just a tiny bit. And the yellow is super easy. You don't really need to add very much. If you want more of a mustard colored yellow, this is kind of like a light yellow, lemon yellow, you can add a little dot of warm brown to your icing if you want, again, that sort of more retro mustard feel. We're just going to stick with the lemon yellow, which is just about 1 dot. The nice thing about yellow icing is that it will darken the longer it sits. Your yellows and your reds and your blacks will darken the longer they sit. So you don't want to add too much color or else you'll have an oversaturated icing. And what can happen when you have too much color in your icing is it can bleed into the other colors. So you want to always go err on the lighter side. So then we're just going to do the same thing we did before, cut the tip of our piping bag off, and then we're going to go ahead and fill our yellow outline piping bag. Keep in mind, just like the white, for your outline piping consistency, you really only need about a tablespoon, maybe 2 tablespoons at most of icing in your piping bag because you're not going to be using as much of the outline as you will of the flood. So skipping ahead a little bit, we're getting to our flood consistency. I've added some water to the rest of my icing that was in my bowl, and this is probably about a 5 to 8 second consistency. It's a little bit thinner, but it will still work. Again, we're shooting for that 15-second consistency, but this one can still work. You just really don't want it to get any thinner than this. Okay, moving forward, I'm just going to show you how I add the colors to the dyes. I'm not going to show you the entire process of mixing the icing. The next color we're going to be doing is the peach color. So it's 1 drop of lemon yellow and 1 drop of rose pink to our 3 ounces of icing. Looks like I was having a little bit of trouble getting my pink out of the bottle, but there we go. There's our 1 drop of each. Spray it so it gets a little bit thinner, and then we're just going to mix until we get a really nice, pretty peach color. Up next is our orange. We're going to do 3 drops of lemon yellow, 2 drops of rose pink, and 1 drop of buckeye brown. And then mix. This is going to be more of a terracotta orange, I guess you could say, or more of like a burnt orange. It's not going to be your big bright pumpkin orange. So that's not what we're looking for. Up next is the mauve color. It's 2 drops of rose pink and 1 drop of buckeye brown. And then our last color is just the solid brown. We are going to do 6 drops of buckeye brown and just mix, mix, mix. And then you have all of your colors created. Don't forget to do an outline icing and a flood icing for each color. So at the end of this, you will have 12 icing bags. Now you can move on to decorating your cookies.